The first thing he noticed was the silence, thick and unnatural, as if the world itself had been swallowed. Even the wind refused to pass through the broken gates of the plantation. It felt like something inside was listening. He stood at the rusted iron entrance, camera trembling slightly in his hand. The plantation stretched before him like a rotting corpse, its once grand structure now eaten by time. Vines clung to the walls like veins, pulsing with decay. People in the nearby town had warned him not to come here after sunset. They spoke in hushed tones about screams that echoed from empty halls. Some even claimed the house breathed at night. He didn't believe in ghost stories, not really. His channel thrived on proving myths wrong, on turning fear into entertainment. But something about this place made his confidence feel thin. The gate creaked open with a slow, painful groan as he pushed it. The sound seemed too loud, echoing deeper into the property than it should. It felt like an announcement of his arrival. The path leading to the house was cracked and overgrown. Dead leaves crunched beneath his boots, though no trees above seemed alive enough to shed them. The air carried a faint, sour smell he couldn't quite place. As he approached, the plantation loomed larger, its windows like empty eye sockets staring down at him. Curtains inside shifted slightly, even though there was no breeze. He paused, heart skipping a beat. He told himself it was just his imagination playing tricks. Old houses made noises, and light could deceive the eyes. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The front door stood slightly ajar, swaying gently. Each movement produced a soft knock against the frame, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. It was inviting him in. He reached out and pushed the door open fully. The hinges screamed in protest, the noise echoing through the hollow interior. Dust swirled in the air like disturbed ashes. Inside, the temperature dropped instantly, wrapping around him like cold hands. The smell grew stronger, thick and metallic beneath the rot. His stomach tightened without warning. Somewhere deep within the house, something shifted. A faint sound, like something dragging across wood, reached his ears. And in that moment, he realized he was no longer alone. The moment he stepped deeper inside, the air seemed to thicken around him, pressing against his lungs. Every breath felt slightly wrong, as if the house was filtering it before allowing it in. The silence followed him, heavier now, more aware. His flashlight beam cut through layers of dust, revealing a hallway frozen in decay. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling in long strips like shedding skin. Beneath it, dark stains spread in unnatural shapes. He moved slowly, boots creaking against warped wooden floors. Each step echoed farther than it should, bouncing back from unseen corners. It felt like the house was repeating his presence to itself. On the left, a series of old portraits hung crookedly along the wall. Faces stared out from another time, their expressions stiff and lifeless, but many of them had been scratched out, as if someone had tried to erase them. He paused in front of one portrait that remained untouched. A family stood together, dressed in formal clothing, their eyes hollow with something unspoken. The longer he looked, the more it felt like they were watching him back. A sudden noise broke the stillness, a faint creak from somewhere deeper inside. He turned quickly, shining the light down the corridor. Nothing moved, yet the feeling of being observed intensified. He forced a nervous laugh, whispering to his camera as if to reassure himself. This was exactly the kind of place his viewers loved. Creepy, mysterious, full of stories. But his voice sounded smaller than usual. Continuing forward, he noticed deep scratches carved into the walls. They weren't random marks, but frantic, repeated lines, clustered in certain areas. Some were so deep they cut into the wood beneath the plaster. His fingers hovered near one of the marks, but he stopped short of touching it. Something about them felt desperate, almost alive with panic. He could almost imagine the sound of nails dragging across the surface. The smell grew stronger as he walked, no longer faint or distant. It clung to the air, sour and metallic, mixing with the damp rot of the house. His stomach twisted as he tried to ignore it. At the end of the hallway, he found a section of wall that looked different. The paint there was slightly newer, the surface smoother, as if it had been sealed long after the rest of the house had decayed. It stood out like a secret, trying too hard to stay hidden. He stepped closer, raising his hand toward it. As his knuckles lightly tapped the surface, the sound that came back was hollow. and from somewhere beyond that wall, something softly tapped back. The hollow sound lingered in his ears, dull and unmistakable. He tapped again, slower this time, pressing his knuckles harder into the surface. The wall answered with the same empty echo, as if there was nothing behind it but darkness. He stepped back, staring at the section more carefully. The edges didn't quite match the rest of the hallway, the seams faint but visible under the peeling paint. Someone had sealed this part deliberately, hiding whatever lay beyond. His chest tightened as a quiet unease settled into him. This wasn't just an old house falling apart. This was something that had been closed, contained, and forgotten on purpose. He raised the camera, whispering into it, his voice slightly unsteady. This was the kind of discovery that made videos go viral, but even as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting back to the wall. A faint sound brushed against his ears again. Not a knock this time, but something softer, like a slow scrape from inside. It was subtle, almost careful, as if whatever made it didn't want to be heard. He held his breath, listening closely. The sound came again, dragging across the unseen space behind the wall. It felt deliberate, controlled, and far too precise to be imagined. Every instinct told him to leave it alone. Old buildings made noises, and sealed spaces shifted over time. But something deeper, something darker, whispered that this was not natural. He set his bag down and pulled out a small crowbar. The metal felt cold and heavy in his hand, grounding him in a moment that suddenly felt unreal. His heartbeat thudded loudly, filling the silence. The first strike against the wall cracked the surface with a sharp snap. Dust burst outward, filling the air with a choking cloud. The sound echoed through the house, too loud, too final. For a moment, everything went still again. No scraping, no tapping, no shifting from behind the wall. The silence that followed felt different, like something had stopped moving. He hesitated, staring at the small fracture he had made. A faint draft seeped through the crack, carrying with it a stronger version of that metallic smell. It made his stomach churn instantly. Then, just as he leaned closer, something inside shifted violently. A dull thud struck the other side, followed by a faint collapsing sound, and whatever was behind that wall began to give way. The wall didn't break all at once. It sighed before it failed. A jagged crack spread outward, splintering the surface like fragile bone. Then, with a sudden collapse, the structure gave in. Something burst through the opening with a dry, brittle cascade. Pieces struck the floor with hollow clacks, scattering across his boots. For a moment, his mind refused to understand what he was seeing. He stepped back instinctively, his breath catching in his throat. The flashlight trembled in his hand as it traced the shapes on the ground. Pale fragments lay twisted in unnatural positions. A skull rolled slowly to a stop near his foot. Its empty sockets faced him, dark and endless. The jaw hung open as if frozen in a final, silent scream. More followed behind it, spilling from the darkness like a hidden flood. Bones piled over one another, tangled and incomplete. Some were long and cracked, others small enough to belong to children. The smell hit him fully now, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just rot, it was something older, something preserved and disturbed. He gagged, turning his face away as nausea rose violently. Mixed among the remains were rusted chains, their links fused together with age. They clattered against the bones, sharp and metallic. Some still held fragments of torn fabric, stiff and stained. He crouched slightly, unable to look away despite the horror. The arrangement wasn't random, it wasn't natural decay. These bodies had been forced together, crammed into a space too small to hold them. His mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened here. This wasn't burial, and it wasn't an accident, this was concealment. A faint sound interrupted his thoughts, barely audible over his breathing. It came from inside the cavity, deeper than where the bones had fallen. A soft shifting, like something still moving. He slowly raised the flashlight toward the opening. The beam cut into the darkness, revealing more piled remains beyond sight. But something there didn't look still. Then, deep within the hollow space, a shape twitched. A bone shifted on its own, rolling slightly, as if nudged from within. And from the darkness behind it, something exhaled. The breath from the darkness was slow and uneven, like lungs remembering how to work. It dragged through the hollow space behind the wall, stirring dust and something far colder. He froze, every muscle locking as the sound echoed out. The flashlight shook violently in his grip as he stared into the opening. The bones inside no longer looked lifeless, no longer looked still. Something among them had shifted, and it had not been the result of gravity. A faint whisper slipped into the room, too soft to understand. It layered over itself, multiple voices speaking at once in broken fragments. The sound crawled into his ears, scratching at his thoughts. He stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the scattered remains at his feet. His breath came fast now, sharp and panicked. The house around him seemed to react, the walls creaking as if adjusting to his fear. From somewhere above, a heavy thud echoed through the ceiling. Footsteps followed, slow and deliberate, crossing a floor that should have been empty. Each step landed with unnatural weight. He spun around, shining the light back down the hallway. The portraits were no longer still, their scratched faces somehow more distorted. It felt as though their ruined eyes had turned toward him. The whispers grew louder behind him, rising from the broken wall. Words began to form, faint but clear enough to feel. They weren't calling for help. They were calling to him. Cold air rushed past his neck, carrying a presence that wasn't there moments ago. Shadows stretched along the walls, bending in ways that didn't match the light. Something unseen moved just beyond his vision. He backed away further, heart pounding against his ribs. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching unnaturally as he tried to retrace his steps. The front door felt impossibly far away. A shape appeared at the far end, barely visible in the dimness. It stood still at first, thin and wrong, its outline flickering like a dying flame. Then it took a slow step forward. Behind him the bones shifted again, louder this time. A clatter rose as if many hands were trying to move at once. The whispers sharpened into desperate overlapping voices. And then he understood, not with logic but with dread. The wall hadn't just hidden bodies, it had contained them. And now that it was open, they were no longer trapped. The realization hit him too late, settling into his chest like a final verdict. The house was no longer silent, no longer waiting. It had awakened and it knew he was inside. He turned and ran, his boots slipping against the warped floorboards. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, twisting in ways he didn't remember. Every step felt slower, as if something unseen resisted his escape. The front door should have been just ahead, but it wasn't there. In its place stood a blank wall, aged and unbroken. Panic surged through him as he skidded to a stop. He spun around, trying to find another way out. The corridor behind him had changed, narrowing and bending into unfamiliar shapes. The house was rearranging itself. The whispers were no longer distant. They surrounded him now. Dozens of voices layered together, pleading, crying, and accusing all at once. Some sounded like children. A cold pressure brushed against his arm, stopping him mid-step. He looked down to see nothing at first, just empty air trembling slightly. Then faint impressions formed, like invisible hands gripping him. He yanked himself free and stumbled forward, heart hammering uncontrollably. Shadows peeled away from the walls, stretching toward him like reaching limbs. The air grew colder with every second. Ahead, a doorway appeared where none had been before. Desperate, he rushed toward it, bursting through without thinking. The moment he crossed the threshold, his stomach dropped. He was back in the same hallway, standing before the broken wall. The bones were still scattered across the floor, but now they were shifting more violently. Some were beginning to rise. Figures began to form from the remains, incomplete and twisted. Hollow shapes pulled themselves together, their movements jerky and unnatural. Empty eye sockets locked onto him. The whispers turned into a unified sound, low and heavy with meaning. It wasn't begging anymore. It was deciding. The air tightened around him as the figures took slow steps closer. The wall behind them sealed itself with a sickening crack, erasing the only opening. And in that final moment, he understood the truth. He hadn't uncovered the house's secret. He had replaced it.